Hey everyone, welcome back to Nile Certify. In this video, we are diving into real-world practice question for AZ-104 Administrator exam, and today we are focusing specifically on the first domain, which is about managing Azure identities and governance. Whether you are just starting out your prep or reviewing key topics, this will help you test your knowledge and understand how the questions are structured. In this video, I will walk you through each question, explain the answer choices clearly, and help you understand not just what's right, but why. So grab a notebook or just follow along and let's go into the questions. All right, before we jump into the questions, here what you should expect in this video. As I said, we will be focusing only on domain 1 of AZ-104 exam, that's manage Azure identity and governance. After each question, I will walk you through the correct answer and explain why it's right in simple terms. So let's start it. This question, you need to grant an administrator the ability to manage Azure role assignments, such as grant, revoke, or modify role assignments at the subscription scope. Which built-in role should you assign? A, owner, B, contributor, C, reader, D, user access administrator. Now let's take a close look at this question. You need to grant an administrator the ability to manage Azure role assignments at the subscription scope. The key phrase here is manage Azure role assignments. That means this person needs permission to grant, remove, or update who has access to what. Also, please notice subscription scope. So this isn't just about single resource or resource group. We are talking here about a broader level of access. Now let's look into the options. Option A, owner. The owner role allows you full control over everything in Azure, including managing access. So technically, yes, it works. It meets the requirement of the question, but it's not the best answer. And here's why. You are giving the user way more power than they actually need. And this where the principle of least privilege comes in. This principle, if you are not familiar with it, means you should only give people the minimum level of access they need to do their job. Nothing more, nothing less. Why? Because it reduces risk. If someone has more access than necessary, they could make accidental changes or even become a security risk if their account is compromised. So yeah, owner would work, but it violates least privilege principle. Option B, contributor. And contributor role can manage resources, but not access permissions. This makes this a clear no. Option C, reader. A reader is just for viewing. It cannot manage anything or change access. So it's also a wrong answer. Now let's go to option D, user access administrator. The user access administrator role allows someone to manage role assignments. They can grant, revoke, or update access at the subscription level, just like the question asks, and this is why it's the correct answer. And it's correct answer because it does this without giving them full control over all resources. And this what exactly what's needed. And it also follows the principle of the least privilege. So remember, the exam loves testing how well you understand roles versus responsibilities and whether you can apply security best practices like least privilege. So when a question asks for a specific task, like managing access, choose the role that matches it directly without adding unnecessary permission. Okay, question number 2. You are auditing your Azure subscription and need to ensure that all resources comply with organizational tagging standards. You also want to automatically remediate non-compliant resources. Which other service should you use? A. Azure Policy. B. Azure Monitor. C. Azure Blueprint. D. Azure Advisor. Now let's break this question together. Uh, I would like to stop and highlight two key phrases. And this is an important skill when you are sitting for this exam. You need to actually understand what the question really means. I believe here in this question, the key phrases are comply with tagging standards and also automatically remediate non-compliant resources. These are the clues that tell us exactly what service we need. So option A, Azure Policy, and Azure Policy is a correct answer. And here's why. Azure Policy allows you to create and assign rules called policies to enforce organizational standards. You can audit things like missing tags, enforce allowed locations, and even require specific naming conventions. But more importantly, Azure Policy can do automatic remediation. For example, if a resource is missing a required tag, it can add a default value automatically. This directly matches both parts of the question, auditing for compliance and remediating non-compliant resources. Option B, Azure Monitor. Azure Monitor is used to collect metrics and logs, so it's great for performance monitoring and diagnostics. But it doesn't enforce standards, and it can't fix non-compliant resources. So this one is not a fit. Option C, Azure Blueprints. And Blueprints let you deploy environment with a predefined set of resources, including things like ARM templates, RBAC roles, and even Azure policy assignments. But the important thing is blueprints help you set compliance, not enforce or remediate it after the fact. So while blueprints might include a policy, the enforcement still happens through Azure Policy. This makes this answer close but not correct on its own. Option D, Azure Advisor. And Azure Advisor gives you recommendation like how to save costs, improve security, or optimize performance. But it doesn't enforce tagging or remediate anything. It tells you what's wrong, but it doesn't fix it. You have to do this. So remember, when you see a question mentioning compliance and especially automatic remediation, your brain should immediately go to Azure Policy because it's the only tool on this list that actually enforces roles across your environment and can even fix resources that don't meet the standards. And that's exactly what you need for proper governance in real world and for passing AZ-104 exam. Uh, Next question. Your company wants to require multi-factor authentication, MFA, for all users accessing the Azure portal, but only when they sign in from outside the corporate network. What should you configure? A. Conditional access policy in Microsoft Entra ID, formerly known as Azure AD. B. Azure Policy. C. Role-based access control, RBAC. D. Azure Firewall. Let's look at what the question is really asking. Your company wants to require MFA for user accessing Azure portal, but only when they sign in from outside the corporate network. Right away, two key phrases should jump out at you. First one, multi-factor authentication, MFA. Second one is only when signing from outside the corporate network. The second part is critical because it tells you this is a conditional requirement based on the user's sign-in location. So option A, conditional access policy in Microsoft Entra ID. A conditional access policy allows you to control access based on condition, like the user location, device, app, or risk level. In this case, you can configure a policy to require MFA only when the user is outside the trusted network. And that's exactly what the question is asking for, and this is the right answer. So this option is spot on. Option B, Azure Policy. And Azure Policy is used to enforce rules or resource configurations, like ensuring tags or limiting regions. But it doesn't control how users sign in or enforce MFA. So this one is not relevant for identity-based access control. Option C, role-based access control, RBAC. And RBAC controls what actions a user can perform in Azure, like who can manage a VM or who can read storage data. However, it doesn't decide when or how users authenticate. So again, it's not applicable for MFA or conditional logic. Option D, Azure Firewall. And firewall is used for network security and traffic filtering, like blocking traffic to or from certain IPs. It doesn't handle user authentication or enforce MFA. So while it's a security service, it's not related to this scenario. Anytime you see a question involving MFA that depends on context, like the user's location or risk level, think conditional access. It's one of the most powerful tools in Entra ID, and it shows a lot in AZ-104 exam. And remember, using conditional access to apply MFA only when needed is also a great way to balance security with user experience. Moving to the next question. You want to give a user permission to manage only virtual machines in one resource group. At what scope should you assign the role? A, management group. B, subscription. C, resource group. D, resource. All right, let's break down this question step by step. You want to give a user a permission to manage only VMs in one resource group. The key phrase here is only virtual machine in one resource group. This tells us two important things. We are limiting access to only VMs. Also, we are keeping it inside a single resource group. So the question is really asking, what is the narrowest scope we can use to meet this exact requirement without over-assigning permissions? Remember the least privilege principle we talked about? Here we encounter it again. Now let's look into the options. First option is management group, and management group is the highest level of scope in Azure. It can contain multiple subscriptions. And if you assign a role at this level, you are giving access to way more than just one resource group, which completely breaks the principle of least privilege. So this one is out. Option B, subscription. A subscription contains many resource groups, and each of those can have many types of resources. Again, this scope is too wide for what the question is asking. You would be giving the user permissions across all resource groups and resources in that subscription, not just that one. Option C, resource group, and this is the best fit, and this is the correct answer. Assigning the role at the resource group level lets the user manage only the resources inside that one group, including virtual machines. It gives them just enough access to do the job and nothing more. which aligns perfectly with the principle of least privilege. Option D, resource. This option would work only if you wanted to give access to a single VM, not all VMs in the group. The question says virtual machines, plural with the S. So this scope would be too narrow and not practical in this case. So this question is a great example of how Azure role assignments work across different assignments groups. And you need to remember, always match the scope to what's actually needed. In this case, the user needs access to a group of related resources, not everything, and not just one. So the resource group scope is the perfect fit. Moving to the next question. You have 10 Azure subscriptions and want to apply the same policy to all of them at once. What should you use? A. Management group. B. Azure policy assignments at the subscription level. C. Resource group. D. Blueprints. Now, reading this question deeply, right away, I can identify two key phrases here. First one is 10 Azure subscription. Second one, apply the same policy to all of them at once. So this question is really about scaling governance. How do we manage policy across multiple subscriptions efficiently? Now, our first option is the management group, and Azure management groups sit above subscription in the Azure resource hierarchy. It's above subscription level. And by assigning a policy to a management group, that policy will automatically apply to all subscriptions under it. So if you have got 10 subscriptions and they are all in the same management group, you only need to assign the policy once, which is super efficient. And this is exactly what Microsoft recommends for managing policy at scale, and this is why option A, management groups, is the correct answer. Option B, Azure policy assignments at the subscription level. This could work, but it's not the best option because you would have to assign the same policy manually to each of the 10 subscriptions, one by one. That's time consuming and hard to maintain and is not scalable. So this is not the correct answer. Option C, resource group. And resource group exists inside subscription, so they are too low in the hierarchy for this task, and you would need to assign the policy in each subscription, then in each resource group, and that's way too much overhead. Option D, blueprints. Blueprints can include policies, RBAC roles, and templates, but they are mostly used for initial environment setup, not ongoing policy enforcement across many subscriptions. Also, you still need to assign blueprints individually per subscription. So this doesn't solve the add-ons part of the question. This is a great example of understanding Azure scope hierarchy. So at the very top, we have management group, under it, subscription, under it, resource group, and then at the very bottom, resource. Whether you are asked to apply something across multiple subscriptions, always think management group first. It's the only scope that lets you do that with a single assignment. Next question. You need to give someone the ability to reset passwords for all users in Azure AD. Which role should you use? A. Owner RBAC. B. Password administrator, which is Azure AD role. C. Contributor, also an RBAC role. And D. User administrator, which is an Azure AD role. Now let's read the question and highlight the key phrases here. Here in this question, it's reset password for all users in Azure AD. And this tells us two important things. First, we are working in Azure Active Directory, not on Azure resources. And the goal is resetting user passwords. Nothing more, nothing less. So let's go through options one by one. Option A, owner RBAC. The owner role in Azure RBAC gives full control over Azure resources like VMs, storage accounts, and resource groups. But it doesn't apply to Azure AD objects like users or passwords. So this role is powerful, but completely irrelevant in this case. Option B, password administrator. And this is the correct answer. Because the password administrator role in Azure AD allows a user to reset passwords for non-administrators, meaning regular users. And if the person needs to reset passwords for all users, excluding other admins, this is exactly the role for that. Option C, contributor RBAC. And contributor is another RBAC role for managing Azure resources, like creating or managing virtual machines, for example. But again, it has nothing to do with Azure AD users or passwords. So this one's also off topic. Option D, user administrator. And this role is more powerful than necessary for this scenario. The user administrator can reset passwords for all users, including administrators, and also create, delete, and manage users and groups. So it would work, but it goes beyond what the question is asking. And as always, we want to apply the principle of least privilege. Give only the permissions needed, no more and no less. This makes the password administrator the better choices here. And a general tip for the exam: if the task is about managing Azure resources, think RBAC. If the task is about users, groups, assigning, or identity, think Azure AD roles. And when it's about resetting passwords, especially for standard users, go with password administrator. Next question. You want all resources to have a cost center tag. If they don't, Azure should add it automatically. What should you use? A, Azure Policy with a modify effect. B, Azure Advisor. C, Azure Monitor. D, Azure Tags in the portal. Let's pause on the two key parts. All resources to have a cost center tag. So here we are talking about tagging enforcement. Second part is added automatically. It's not just detection, but automatic remediation. The second part is crucial because it tells us we are not just auditing, but we need something that fixes the problem. Now let's go and look into the options. Option A, Azure Policy with the modify effect. And this is the correct answer because Azure Policy lets you define rules like requiring a cost center tag on all the resources. And the modify effect specifically allows Azure to automatically add missing tags to resources during creation or update. So instead of blocking the deployment or just flagging it as a non-compliant, Azure Policy can silently fix it by injecting the required tag. And that's exactly what this question is asking for: policy with automatic enforcement. Option B, Azure Advisor. And Azure Advisor give you recommendations like best practices to save money, improve performance, or tighten security. But it can't enforce policies or apply tags. And you can tell that from the name, Azure Advisor, not Azure Implementer. So it doesn't remediate anything, and this one doesn't fit. Option C, Azure Monitor, which tracks metrics and logs. It's useful for visibility and alerting, but also it doesn't enforce tagging or make changes to resources. It's great for monitoring, but not for policy enforcement. Option D, Azure Tags in Portal. And this one is tricky because yes, you can manually apply tags using the portal, but that's not automatic. And if you forget to tag a resource or someone else creates one without a tag, Azure won't fix it for you. This is a manual task, not a policy, and this is why A, Azure policy with the modify effect is the correct one. So just remember, anytime you see a phrase like automatically add or enforce tagging standards, your mind should go straight to Azure policy and specifically the modify effect when the goal is automatic correction. This is a common governance feature and also a common exam topic too, so keep an eye for it. Next question. You want to stop people from deleting resource group, but still allow updates to the resources inside it. Which lock should you use? A, read only. B, delete. C, contributor lock. D, owner lock. And this is a classic governance style questions. And let's break it down by the keywords. So here we have stop people from deleting. We need to prevent delete action, but also still allow updates. So we want to permit changes to the resources inside. And this means we need a lock that blocks deletion only without interfering with regular operations. So let's look into the options. Option A, read only. And now this one might sound right at first, but actually it's too restrictive because a read-only lock doesn't just block deletes, it also blocks any modifications like starting a VM, changing configurations, or even updating tags. So if the goal is to allow updates, this won't work. Option B, delete. And delete lock, sometimes called cannot delete lock, prevent resources from being deleted, but also allows full read and write access. And this is the correct answer here. This means users can manage and update resources inside the resource group. They just cannot remove them or the group itself. And this matches the scenario perfectly. Now let's go to option C, contributor lock. And there is no such thing as a contributor lock in Azure. Contributor is a role in RBAC, not a locking mechanism. This is a distractor option, so we can just eliminate it. And option D is owner lock. Some idea here. Owner is an RBAC role, not a lock type. And locks and RBACs are separate things in Azure. Locks are applied at the resource level to prevent action, while RBAC controls who can perform those actions. So to recap, use a read-only lock when you want to block all changes. Use a delete lock when you want to block deletions but still allow updates. And always watch out for distractors like contributor lock or owner lock. They don't exist as lock types. Now, let's go to this question. You need to deploy a consistent set of role assignments, Azure policies, and ARM templates to multiple subscriptions as part of governance baseline. Which service should you use? A, Azure Blueprints. B, Management Groups. C, Azure Policy. D, Azure Resource Manager Templates. And let's pick out the keywords that will guide us. Please pay attention to consistent set, which suggests repeatable, reusable configuration. And also pay attention to role assignments, policy, ARM templates, which means combining multiple governance and infrastructure items. Also, this one is across multiple subscriptions, so it has to scale across boundaries. The combination points to a governance and deployment solutions. And let's look at the option. Option A, Azure Blueprints, which is the correct answer because Azure Blueprints are designed exactly for this use case. A blueprint can include role assignments, Azure policies, ARM templates, resource groups. You create the blueprint once and then assign it to one or more subscriptions. This makes it ideal for deploying a governance baseline at scale, especially when spinning up new environments. Option B, management groups. And management groups are a way to organize multiple subscriptions under a hierarchy, as we mentioned. So they let you group and apply things like policies across subscriptions. But management groups are not a deployment tool. This is important to remember here. They don't package or deliver ARM templates or role assignments. So while they are part of a governance structure, they are not the right tool here. Option C, Azure Policy. And Azure Policy is great for enforcing rules like requiring tags or blocking certain SKU use, but it doesn't handle role assignments or ARM templates. So it's one piece of the puzzle, but not enough to deliver full governance package. Option D, Azure Resource Manager ARM templates. And ARM templates are used to deploy infrastructure like VMs, storage accounts, or networks, but they don't include policies or role assignments as part of governance baseline across subscription. They are powerful for infrastructure as a code, but not for policy-driven governance. So this question is testing whether you know how to bundle and deploy multiple governance elements, not just one. And remember this, if it's about standardizing setup across environment, includes policies, RBAC, and infrastructure, and needs to apply to multiple subscription, go with Azure Blueprints. Next question. Your company wants MFA for all admin role sign-ins, but only if the sign-in is from an untrusted network. Which service and condition should you configure? A, Azure Policy with network location condition. B, conditional access with sign-in risk condition. C, conditional access with named location condition. D, RBAC with MFA requirement. This is a very real world and exam relevant question. Your company wants MFA for all admin role sign-in, but only if the sign-in from an untrusted network. Now, let's focus here on MFA, which is multiple factor authentication. So we are talking about authentication security. Also, the question mentioned admin role sign-ins, so we want to protect privileged accounts, and only if from an untrusted network. What this reminds you? This is reminds us of a conditional logic based on location. So this question is clearly pointing toward a solution that uses conditional access. Keep that in mind while we are walking through the options. Option A, Azure Policy with network location condition. And Azure Policy is used for resource compliance, not user authentication. This is an important distinction. It doesn't have any control over any sign-in behavior or MFA. So even though network location sounds close, Azure Policy is the wrong tool for this. Option B, conditional access with sign-in risk condition. Conditional access is the right service, but the condition here doesn't match. Sign-in risk is based on machine learning, things like unfamiliar sign-in behavior or non-compromised credentials. And this question doesn't mention anything about risk level. It's specifically about untrusted network, which is a location-based condition. Option C, conditional access with named location condition. And if you are thinking this is the right answer, you are correct. It is. In Microsoft Entra ID, conditional access allows you to define named location, such as trusted IP ranges or even countries. You can then apply a policy that requires MFA only if the sign-in is coming from outside those trusted locations, and that's exactly what the scenario is describing. Option D, RBAC with the MFA requirement, and RBAC defines what a user can do, not how they authenticate. You cannot attach an MFA policy directly to a role using RBAC. So this sounds good at first, but it's not technically valid. Uh, to recap, just please remember this rule. If the question is about sign-in control, user context, or MFA based on conditions, think conditional access. If the condition include location like IP ranges or trusted network, go with named location condition. Moving to our last question in this video. And by the way, if you are enjoying this video or getting value from it, please remember to subscribe and hit the like button. This will help us creating more content like this one. So the question is, you set a budget for $5,000 in Azure Cost Management with an alert at 90%. What will Azure do at 90% spend? A, stop all resources automatically. B, send an alert and continue running resources. C, restrict deployments until next month. D, lock the subscription. In this question, I want you to focus on this phrase, budget with an alert at 90%. This is important. It says here alert, not enforcement, and this tells us right away Azure isn't going to stop or block anything. It's just going to let you know. Remember, alert. So now let's look into the options. Option A, stop all resources automatically. And this one is not the correct answer because Azure doesn't stop or shut down your resources based on budget alerts. Budget tracking is informational and not a control mechanism. Option B, send an alert and continue running resources. And this is the correct answer because when you set a budget in Azure Cost Management, Azure will track your spend and send an email or action group alert when you hit a threshold like 90%. But it will not take an automatic action to stop usage. You are still responsible for monitoring and adjusting if needed. Option C, restrict deployments until next month. And this sounds nice, but again, Azure budgets don't restrict deployments because that's a governance action, right? And Azure budgets are not enforcement tool. They are just for cost visibility. So this is not the right answer. Option D, lock the subscription. Again, this sounds strong, but it's incorrect because Azure will never lock your subscription automatically due to budget alerts. That kind of control would have to come from a policy or a manual lock. So, to summarize this question, I want you to remember Azure budgets are tracking tools, are informational tools. They are used for visibility and not enforcement tool. Yes, you can receive alerts, but you will need to combine budgets with things like Azure Policy or automation if you want to enforce limits or take action. This is why answer B, send an alert and continue running resources, is the correct answer here. So this brings us to the end of this video. Thank you for watching, and if you find this helpful, you can visit nilecertify.com For more resources, practice code questions, and expert guidance on your Azure certification journey. Please, if you have any comments, feedback, or you want more clarification in any of the questions, or you would like to request a specific content, let us know in the comments. And good luck with your exam. Thank you.